continue on with this little D-Star inspired traipse through the registry of some of these California counties. This is not meant to be an accurate, historical, thorough examination of each of these properties. It's more me scanning, cherry-picking, if you will, through them, and highlighting things of interest/suspicion. A lot of these histories I find to be very questionable. Origin stories, chain of custody, things of that nature. We're going to talk about El Dorado and Del Norte counties, and this is only properties that are on the National Register of Historic Places. I'm certain that there are many more interesting and historic properties, events, places, much more than what's being represented. That seems to me they pick and choose a little area, a courthouse or two, and they try to paint the narrative of this entire area. And they can feel free to destroy the rest of it and rezone it and do whatever they want, as long as they've thrown you this little token, this little bone here. Start here at the St. George Reef Light Station. The importance of the lighthouse here, Point St. George off the California coast, is revealed dramatically in 1865 by the wreck of Brother Jonathan, shoals of the St. George Reef with the loss of 166 lives. President Andrew Johnson reserved land for a lighthouse on Point St. George on June 8th, 1866. After some back and forth regarding the location, in 1882, so it's 16 years later, Northwest Seal Rock was selected as the site. And in 1883, the annual report for this year estimated the construction would cost $333,000. Since there was no shelter near the rock, the 137-ton La Ninfa was fitted to accommodate 30 men and towed from San Francisco by the wrecking steamer Whitelaw, which succeeded after several attempts laying the 12,000-pound mooring near the reef. The workmen had to travel between the boat and the rock with a rig that was connected to an overhead traveler line and an iron ring from which a round platform was suspended by 3 lines of rope. One trip took 3 minutes for them to jump to safety. For the next 2 years, little progress was made. Funds were spent on quarrying granite in a site on Mad River, about 5 miles north of Humboldt Bay. Preparations had to be repeated because of the deterioration from exposure, disuse, and damage from the heavy seas. And a report on the construction of the light station prepared after he left his position as superintendent in 1886, Captain A.H. Payson observed that the construction process had been needlessly prolonged by the unpredictability of congressional appropriation of funds. Stones, which ranged in weight from 2 to 17 tons, caused numerous delays, and over 14,000 tons of stone were used in the structure. I don't know where, so we're told. And in 4 years, only 1 season of work had been accomplished. By the end of 1889, the 17th course of masonry had been laid under severe conditions, during which high waves washed the workers' quarters away several times. Even though the walls of the completed pier structure were 17 feet above sea level, spray often washed over the top, making it difficult to lay the stone, because the mortar gets washed off and all that. Nevertheless, progress continued, and by the end of fiscal year 1891, so 10 years later, the base was completed, and the tower with its brick lining was built and backed up for 30 feet above the base, nearly to the window sills of the 3rd story. Finished work was done the 66 days between August 23rd and October 29th. The completed light station was left in charge of 3 keepers. The light was 6 feet in diameter, stood 17 feet high, and it flashed alternately red and white with 13-second intervals. In 1913, the steam-powered fog signal, a 13-inch whistle, was changed to air sirens powered by a compressed air plant. The sirens were replaced by an air-powered diaphone horn in 1936. Interesting numbers there. Del Norte also had another lighthouse on the registry. It's called Crescent City Lighthouse. Built on an island and lit in 1856, the 11th lighthouse built on the west coast. It was in service for over 100 years, and now it serves as a museum. And it's a tangible link, we're told, with the early maritime history of the Northern California coast, one of the oldest original lighthouses still standing, and the oldest on the north coast of California. In 1856, construction of the lighthouse was begun on Battery Point Islet, a rocky point of land accessible by foot from the mainland during only periods of low tide. There was a Cape Cod dwelling with a tower rising through the center, and the light could be seen 14.5 miles out at sea. A significant navigational aid to ships traveling up and down the Pacific coast for more than 100 years. Now, as part of the series of Pacific lighthouses, it was a signal to ships at sea, providing bearings as well as a warning. We thought we were going to advertise what you had for dinner. It served to mark the entrance to the small harbor, which was especially important as a point of entry to the gold fields of southern Oregon during the 1850s. Of course. The building is also important for its architectural value. Built only 6 years after California statehood, the main structure is a 1.5-story stone building with a basement. Not sure how you build a basement with when you're like that low to the coast, but it says it's a basement. Records show that the granite was shipped in. Timber was milled locally. So it operated until 1965 when it was replaced by a light installed at the end of the new harbor jetty. The federal government formally transferred the property to the county for historical monument purposes, at which point it was leased to the Del Norte Historical Society. Now, recently, the light was reactivated, and now it serves as a private aid to navigators. And that is all that we have for Del Norte. There is a ditch. There is a defunct roadway. There are some Native American sites of which there's zero information and nothing on the map. And that is all the representation. If I was from Del Norte, like winter is coming, if I was a Jon Snow from Del Norte, I would be pissed, homie. I would be like, why you don't represent my county better? These government pendejos is like mentirosas, man. Today they tell me one thing, pero mañana otra cosa. Now there are some minefields in El Dorado. 4 original mining claims. This Hangtown, Goldbug 61-acre park, about a mile from downtown Placerville. 3 gold mines, Hattie, Priest, and Silver Pine. The 8-stamp mill, a dam, a holding pond on the east side of the historic Mother Lode, with the district's environment is typical early mining associated with the gold rush of 1849. Approximately 250 additional mining sites are evident. 250. Tunnels, prospect holes, ground sluicing, all within the boundary of the district. An integral part of the Placerville mining, we're told. This park represents a typical mining district of the Mother Lode. It's currently accessible to the public, at least as of the 60s, while the other 2 are planned for restoration and public access. I don't know if they ever got there, but after it became a park, a bunch of the other structures and cottages were removed. Now, there's still apparently evidence of troughing. When Placerville took over the area, a dirt road was so overgrown with shrubbery, mostly blackberries, that the road was 8 feet wide, so it's been widened and paved. There's 5 main tunnels, and they're still visible, but for safety reasons, most excavations were blasted closed in 1965. For your safety. In other news, the FDA approved cigarettes. So the Bureau of Land Management took over in 1949. And it's mentioned, of course, unknown, who may have preceded the miners. Because of fires, all the files were lost, and therefore no records remain. Oh, how about that? Who would have thought? Such a strange, rare thing to happen. First one is the Hattie Goldbug Mine, the original excavation of which is on the north side of Big Canyon Creek, where there's an outcropping of quartz, which is what led to the digging. It's evident by the troughing in the hole, which is now becoming covered by undergrowth. This is again written in the 60s. Partway up the hill on a narrow path, the original entrance was merely an open tunnel with such poor drainage that one waded through water to enter the mine, making me wonder if it was ever actually a mine. Being in hard rock, Mariposa slate, the mine has maintained its original form and is therefore considered in excellent shape. Ranging from 5 to 6 feet in width and height, the tunnel extends 362 feet into the hill, showing the quartz veins followed by the miners, but not mined. The formation of the tunnel is a result of blasting the rock to extract the quartz-bearing gold ore. All work done in the mine was by blasting and the use of hand tools. In that slate, hand tools. As the tunnel proceeds into the hill, groundwater can be experienced along the way. What kind of experience? Touching, tasting, immersion? At the back of the mine, tunnel splits into a Y. The left tunnel ends at approximately 20 feet in an area called the Black Hole of Calcutta for some reason. The right tunnel extends in an area called Blue Grotto Drift, at which point there is a air shaft opening which extends 100 feet to the surface, which keeps the mine cool and fresh at all times. About 50 feet over the original rail tracks are still in place on the dirt floor, under the wooden flooring that they laid in 1965 to cover it up. They laid a wooden floor over the full length of the mine to facilitate tourist traffic. How about that? The second mine is the Priest Mine, which is about 60 feet above the other one. The open entrance is an overgrown trail found on the side of the hill. The tunnel extends 150 feet into the side of the hill with a dirt floor, about 5 and 6 feet in width. The ceiling has a curved design about 5 feet high, and the tool marks can be seen throughout the entire mine. About 65 feet in, there's a room called the Powder Room, which has a carved column supporting the ceiling. The room is squared, as opposed to being a dugout area. Really, a squared room, huh? Another large squared room is at the back of the mine. Because lighting installed in 65 has been vandalized, they closed this mine up to the public. The existing wooden door has been wired and sealed until proper security can be established. The third is the Silver Pine Mine. Located behind the ore hopper of the stamp mill, the excavation extends 130 feet to the north, where the rest of the tunnel remains buried. There's a 22-foot piece of rail which sticks out from the floor, indicating additional tracks, probably still beneath the surface. The destruction of this mine entrance occurred during an alleged argument of the owners of the Silver Pine claim. If legend is correct, which it rarely is, it is believed to still hold an ore cart with ore in it. All 4 claims were bought by Meagher of Independent Ironworks of Oakland in the 1940s, after the government forced every gold mine shut. Oh, that's right. It was what's the term they use again? An essential business, right? So all the gold mines were by the government forced closed, which is why mining ceased in these areas, and why the mining companies went bankrupt, and why Mr. Meagher was able to roll in from the ironworks and buy them all. He decided not to develop the area, of course, and turned the property over to the U.S. Bureau of Land Management in 1949. How convenient. A rich guy rolls in, buys it, and then says, you know what, never mind, I'm going to give this to the government. Sure. This isn't the last time we've heard of Mr. Meagher of Independent Ironworks. City of Placerville leased the property from the government, the federal government, 1965. Got to lease your own land back to be used as a park under the Recreational Use Act. And finally, in 1981, 30 years later, the property was turned over to the city of Placerville. Oh, all right, you can have your own land back. After we charge you for 30 years payment, the first 130 feet of the tunnel follows the slate, and it was another 130 feet before running across another vein of quartz. The second mine, the Priest Mine, information is still being gathered. Descendants of families in the area state the San Francisco Catholic Church conducted services in one of the back rooms for the miners, thus the name Priest Mine. Official records have been destroyed by fire in both San Francisco and El Dorado County. Oh, what a coincidence. Leave little or no documentation available. Sorry, I guess it belongs to the government. You guys can't find your paperwork. 1925, an air shaft was sunk from the top of the mountain to the Gold Bug Mine for fresh air. 1925? Seems a little late in the game since those mines were most prosperous in the 1860s to 80s, but whatever. Third, the Silver Pine Mine. Well, it's only known that Meagher owned the Silver Pine Mine in 1930, although it was probably first mined in the 1860s. So only 70 years of unaccountable history. The greatest value this mine has today, we're told, is the, quote, unknown about it. As the story goes, one of the owners had an argument as one was preparing to leave the area temporarily, and so one of them blew up the mine entrance to protect his interest during his absence, and then, never came back. So good job. Now, they claim that by slowly reopening this mine, they will find perhaps some remnants of the early mining era, including that aforementioned ore cart. If this is true, there is a strong potential to yield additional information regarding the entire gold mine process, as well as another interpretation for the public. I love that line, as well as another interpretation for the public, because that is something that people should be aware of. All history is an interpretation of events. It is impossible to consider all ends. It's impossible to know all stories. It's impossible to know motivation. It's impossible to guess or prove motive. All we have, really, is to gather as much as we can and give our interpretation. And that's what this is. This is my interpretation based on their interpretation. Just don't forget that about history. It's never the whole story. George Washington never told a lie, chopped down a cherry tree, had wood teeth. Buh. Shows a lot more to that man's life than those 3 things. Then any child will regurgitate back at you as if they know who the guy is. Those things aren't even true. Everyone tells lies. He didn't have no damn wooden teeth. And who knows about the cherry tree? I mean, stupid story. I cannot tell a lie, father. 'Twas me that cut down the cherry tree with my wooden teeth like a beaver. George Cousins was contracted to build the stamp mill on the slope of the silver mine claim between 1860 and 1874. So at least we know who built that damn mill. George Peabody is thought to have built the building. And as far as the holding pond, well, Big Canyon Creek begins on a place called Indian Hill. The pond developed in the area. In dry years, the spring dries up. Late 1948, Mr. Meagher built a dam on the creek to hold water for the swimming hole, not the miners. And that's why the dam and pond are still there. That's amazing. So long after the 1848, there was no mining going on. It's funny that they even call it that. It has nothing to do with the area. George Meagher just wanted a freaking swimming hole for his rich friends, sounds like. Butthole. Skinny dipping in Meagher's house. Legend tells us that the Chileans were panning in the area when the, quote, white man moved them out and down to the other side of the American River. Just moved them out to the areas known as Chili's Bar, which I think is now a chain of restaurants that gets pretty gone nationwide. Thereupon, the first day of the Chileans' gold panning, they took out more gold than the, quote, white man did on Big Canyon Creek. Ha ha! In your face, quote, white man. The Chileans got way more gold than you anyway, despite you somehow forcibly moving them, as if they weren't human beings as well, and able to fight back or stand their ground. Fuck out of here. After World War II, the Meagher family had picked up all the mining claims of the exact same 61.45 acres. One of the mining claims he purchased was from Charles Lindsay, who was camped out on the property in a big tent. The family, with 10 to 12 children, were merely indigent workers in the area. They lived for several years on the property until Meagher either paid them to leave or bought their claim for $150. In other words, paid them to leave or paid them to leave. But not the Chileans. They're not getting any money. They just have to leave. Next up, we have the Mountain Quarries Bridge. This bridge, it embodies the distinctive characteristics of noted engineer John B. Leonard, our old friend, the lover and suitor and longtime admirer and stalker of reinforced concrete, Mr. John B. Leonard. He was, amongst those things, a pioneering proponent for the use of reinforced concrete in California, and the Mountain Quarries Bridge is an excellent example of heavy concrete design characterized by grace and characterized by lightness of feeling that belies the nature of its constructive material. Mr. Leonard also designed other reinforced concrete bridges throughout California and Nevada, along with a series of concrete buildings, but let's back up a bit. In the early 1900s, the Pacific Portland Cement Company had built a railroad line, and it connected their limestone quarry operation in El Dorado County along our American River with the Southern Pacific Main Line at Auburn. The high-grade limestone quarried and transported was used in the manufacturing of cement and the refining of sugar, both which were on the upswing in this era. The Mountain Quarry Cement Bridge, sometimes referred as the No Hands Bridge, and sometimes, this time, referred to as the Look Ma No Hands Bridge, was completed on March 23rd, 1912. At the time, it was the longest concrete skew arch railroad bridge in the world, but with all those qualifiers, it's not impressive. But the bridge was an experiment, just an experiment, to determine if concrete was practical in building long bridges. Nothing like an experiment that you're going to put a train track on, full of a heavy limestone. I mean, that seems like pretty confident. My experiments are more like, mix this together and then run and hide before it blows up. But maybe John B. Leonard is not afraid of death, not if he dies in the arms of his sweet, sweet one true love, reinforced concrete. Now, though a couple of construction faults plagued the bridge, it was considered a great piece of railroad bridge engineering and actually stands today as a proud monument to early engineering and the men who worked with such primitive tools to create it. I'm told all they had were rubber gloves and some scalpels made of wood. The Mountain Quarries Bridge has withstood the tugging of the American river currents for over 90 years, and that was in the 1960s. So, even longer today. Unless it's 1960 when you're hearing this, which is impossible. Unless you're a time traveler, which is possible, perhaps. I don't know. If it is, email me a quarter from 2028. Then when I get it, I'll buy you a space burger or whatever the fuck. We'll fix it in post, Jimmy. I can say whatever I want. You believe in space. You do. Get out of here, dude. You like that? Fuck off, dude. Get out of here. Like that? What's more? Dude. You, dude. Okay. All right, enough. This bridge has even stayed on its footings when the Hellhole Dam, great name, broke in December of 1964, and that damn hellhole took out 2 modern bridges upstream. It also withstood the Valentine's Day flood of 1986, so named because John was actually on his date with the bridge when it happened, which caused the destruction of a 200-foot earth-filled coffer, which is a few miles further downriver. So these occurrences attest to the achievement of John Leonard's use of reinforced concrete. So if it withstood the collapse of these other bridges and dams collapsed, and it didn't, why are they even bothering with other ones? Especially since it's undergone no changes to its original design. Especially since its tracks were removed during World War II, so it stood unmaintained in quiet abandonment. Why? Yet in the 50s and 60s, it was twice pressed into emergency service as a vehicular bridge when floods washed out highway bridges upstream. Oh, all right, you guys can use the one that's been there forever. Here we're told that the bridge is designed for permanence, but first it was experimental. So I guess with the completion of this bridge, we can further our experimentation in reinforced concrete bridge design onto the next decade, but no further. Then we'll start building shitty ones. It was a relatively rare use of the material railroading. Yeah, we know. It was carefully arranged features demonstrate the engineering skills employed such a long time ago. The use of California products, cement, sand, gravel, and steel, negated the often lengthy wait for Eastern materials associated with steel bridges. All the foundations were carved into the bedrock, and the walls were 18 inches thick with twisted iron rods. Workmanship included the construction of a uniform construction joints between the rib, and we are told, is a marvel to behold, but you can see yourself on the centerfold. Now we head into Placerville, where we find the John Pearson Soda Works building, the end of Main Street. 2-story brick and stone building was constructed in 2 stages, as you can imagine. The stone building forms the lower floor, while the second story of brick and stone was added 40 years later, allegedly. The ground floor was also altered in 1974. They added a central stone pillar, we are told. It built in 1859. John Pearson built this bad boy of dressed stone blocks. There's a keystone with the 1897 date appearing over the central window when it was found, and claimed, I'm sorry, whatever the story goes. The east wall is stone in the lower story and brick in the upper. There's a doorway constructed with a steel shutter fashioned for the outside door. Near the bottom of the lower east wall are 2 brick lintels, we're told. First is about 10 feet from the front of the building, which appears to be a doorway between the original building and an adjacent building which is now demolished. Built also by Pearson. The opening was filled in with brick, and another 10 feet back where the hydraulic elevator is located, there's an arched brick lintel just above the grade of the parking lot, which, this one being so low, suggests a cellar door. Imagine that. The rear room goes back another 18 feet to another south wall with a 6-foot high doorway that leads to a tunnel and caves. Imagine that. The front portion of the tunnel and the caves are shored up with shutters, some iron railroad rails, and wagon frame parts just jammed in there. The vertical pillars are of cemented stone and brick masonry. The tunnel goes back 150 feet into the hillside, so it goes back as far as those mines went, which is pretty ridiculous. They claim it was used to store ice. This is just one of several early soda works in Placerville. John McFarland Pearson bought the old Fountain House property from John and James Kitto. You know, fountain as in soda fountain. The natural refrigeration in the tunnel allowed him to store butter. In 1884, an item appeared in the Mountain Democrat newspaper that declared that a gentleman from Chicago says Pearson's cream soda was the best in the United States. Fortunately, he died in 1891 before I could try it. Being a connoisseur of fine cream sodas, I've had at least one in my life. So I'll be the judge of that, Mr. Random Mysterious Gentleman in Chicago. And his son added the water-powered elevator in the back in 1897. Didn't even know that existed. The 1898 souvenir edition of the Mountain Democrat, which seems to be plugging Mr. Pearson's Soda Works very aggressively, it stated that the firm kept a depot for ice and butter and manufactured soda, syrup, cider, dealt wines and liquors, ales and porters, as well as being the local agent, Pabst Beers, and agents for the Royal and Norwich Union Insurance Company. Wow, interesting assortment of hats that the Pearsons are wearing in this era. The property remained in the Pearson family until 1971. Somehow, it was renovated and opened as an old-fashioned ice cream soda parlor and lunch house, but not with old-fashioned prices. For that, you'd have to be a time traveler, which, if you already are, where's my quarter? I never got it in my email. I'm assuming you can email tangible objects in that era. Holograms or something? Yeah. Next up, we have the Baldwin Estate. Quick stop here. This one's it's a log cabin. Actually, not all of these homes. Just a few of these are very interesting, especially Cabin V. So we're told that this estate is architecturally and historically significant, being an example of rustic 1920 architecture, Tahoe Basin. The design of the house, we're told, appears to combine rustic traditions already expressed in the earlier cabin and complex with the picturesque forms of medieval Scandinavian architecture, both forms very well suited to this setting. The U-shaped form of the building, creating a secluded inner courtyard, is unusual and suggests medieval Scandinavian stronghold forms, which not only served as dependable forts, but as self-sufficient living complexes. The structure's impressive massing steeped gables and the appearance of massive log construction adds substance and authority to the statement. The setting of the house is appropriate and the structure picturesque, evoking strong images of a hardy and mysterious, quote, forest culture, unquote, of another time and place. One of the earliest architectural examples of a Scandinavian tradition, whose adaptations have pervaded much of the architecture of the Tahoe Basin. It's almost as if someone else used to live here. Don't you think? Now, it's reported to have been the work of a young architect friend of Mr. Winters from the office of a well-known L.A. firm. The work was unsupervised, however, and no one knows. This apparently reflects a period when the upper class was seeking to demonstrate a lack of interest in displays of ostentatious ornateness. Oh, really? The age and origins of some of these cabins remain unsure. Only one individual maintains they came from part of the Talac complex, and his information contains conflicts. In any event, they relate well in materials and style to the main house, but were probably constructed afterwards. The report concludes that the importance of individuals directly associated must be reviewed, and important earlier settlements in the region should be noted due to the part they played in contributing to the existence of it. Hint, hint. It belonged to Lucky Baldwin, a wealthy 19th century business and society figure, whatever that means. The logs of its 2 guest cabins came from his own earlier Talac complex, and the impressive house was built by his granddaughter, Dextra Baldwin Winter, who later became Mrs. McGonigal. Mr. Lucky Baldwin was one of California's earliest and most successful entrepreneurs. His large profits from Nevada mining operations established him as a leading figure in investment circles by the 1870s. He was elected first president of the Pacific Stock Exchange and began construction on his own opulent San Francisco hotel. He also owned and operated a theater there. He began buying land in the area in the years before 1877, and he's also the owner of the Talac House, House, which is an elegant resort complex with a reputedly international reputation. And visitation to the lake dwindled after the First World War, and those structures were removed in the 20s by Anita Baldwin McClaughry, Baldwin's daughter. Here we have the Bailey Hotel, built in 1863, a rare and excellent example of brick architecture in El Dorado County. Mr. Bailey came from Boston, where he'd been in the commission business. But when he heard of the California gold discovery, well, he organized a company of investors who purchased the ship Edward Everett, sailed on January 6, 1849. Upon his arrival, they secured some teams and supplies and proceeded to the river. And, of course, Boston Mining Company was shortly disbanded, and he became the manager of the Winters Hotel at Coloma. Coloma was the town where the first discovery of gold rush was, and was a county seat for like 7 years. In 1850, so all this was within a year and 9 months, he resigned his position and built his own hotel at Pilot Hill, which was destroyed by fire in 1861, of course. So he chose another location. He labored on the mistaken impression that the Transcontinental and the Railroad would be coming through Pilot Hill, following the wagon route, and the hotel would serve thousands of passengers who would pass through the then thriving commercial center. So he himself manufactured 300,000 bricks and milled all the lumber at the site. Gotta hear. His plans did not develop to fruition because, alas, the Central Pacific Railroad was constructed using a route some miles north. So he just simply used the hotel as a private residence. One wonders when this man had the time to learn all these trades. Making his own bricks. 300,000. Get the fuck out of here. Leading us to Confidence Hall. Formerly a fire station, it was the home of famous Confidence Engine Company No. 1. Members such as John Studebaker, Stephen Gage, who was the vice president of the Central Pacific Railroad, Charles Townsend, all made the company famous for its excellent firefighting ability, built after a fire had partially destroyed the company's firehouse, of course. Then they really stepped it up. They used to hold the county fair in the large wooden hall at the rear of this building, and it symbolizes, allegedly, the transition of Placerville from a rowdy gold rush town of the Wild West to a modern progressive city. First settled by prospectors, of course, but gaining notoriety in 1849 when an impromptu, meaning just a mob, citizens jury carried out the hanging of 3 men accused of stealing gold, the first known hanging in the Mother Lode, and the town became known as Hangtown thereafter. By 1854, it was the 3rd largest town in California, somehow, surpassed only by San Francisco and Sacramento, and so Placerville was chosen. And finally, they were free to occupy itself with such progressive issues as promoting a bond issue to extend the railroad and castigating 2 new restaurateurs who had been gouging tourists. This would have personally I liked Hangtown. This here fine-looking, elegant Queen Anne East Lake Gothic Italian architecture hybrid is as striking as the free-hanging circular stairway leading to the cupola. In the closing years of the 19th century, affluence was exemplified by California's ornate Victorian homes. This is an example of ornate styling, representing the upper social status of its former occupants, considered to be the most elaborate Victorian home in present-day Placerville. And that's really all we know about it. The first permanent mining camp that became known as Georgestown, or Growlersburg, because of the sound made by the heavy nuggets that growled in the miners' pans. George Ehrenhaft, the other George, however, also arrived in the area, and he is credited as the founder of Georgetown, not the other George. That's George's with an apostrophe. This is Georgetown, and this argument exists still to this day on who exactly it's named after. How about we just remove the apostrophe from one and keep the S, so it's Georgestown, and both of y'all can get the credit. In 1852, a fire in Georgestown, accidentally started by a visiting photographer who was documenting the gold miners, devastated the small mining town. In less than 1/2 hour, the fire destroyed the entire town. Residents were quick to rebuild Georgetown, of course, and it was one of several lawless mining towns in the region. But after the fire, the local miners and those from many nearby camps came and donated their time and labor to clear the way for the new town site. Soon a thriving mining town again. Less than 1 year later, the first church was built. The town included general stores, banks, blacksmith shops, stables, saloons, hotels, carpenter shops, meat markets, and many other businesses. Wow, how about that? Social organizations such as E. Clampus Vitus, Oddfellows, and Masons were also part of the growing community. Shocking. However, criminal activity began to rise. Target for frequent mail robberies, which prompted Wells Fargo to discontinue service. And California was viewed as a valuable asset to the Union. For most of America's military history, it should be noted, ever since the colonial period till the early 20th century, state-led militia of citizen soldiers were actually not uncommon. They were the foundation of local armies. And after California becomes a state in 1850, Article 7 of the first California Constitution gave the governor the power to call for the militia to execute the laws of the state, to suppress insurrections, and to repel invasions, which resulted in some of the first militias in California. 17,000 volunteers were told in the state militia, and the Georgetown Blues is part of them. 62 men, we're told. Placerville was also destroyed by a fire in 1856, so when they rebuilt it, brick was a practical choice. Since it was not cheap, why don't you just ask that one guy who just made $300,000 just messing around? This period in California history where establishments were created almost overnight. Gee, how about that? Y'all need to get your story straight. Mr. Lucky Baldwin also owned this house here, the Pope Estate. Remarkable design qualities, we're told. Built by George Talent, the son of the famous San Francisco pioneer banker, one of the oldest banks in the city. The identity of the architect still remains uncertain, but, various aspects indicate the hand of a skillful designer. Oh, indeed. The name of Ernest Coxhead has been mentioned, but unconfirmed. Now, this bank was ultimately incorporated as the Crocker Bank, from the old Big Four. And the penny drops. Tevis family purchased the estate in 1899, having been generating their wealth from stock manipulation, mining properties, and banking concerns, and founding the Bank of California. Also the Kern County Land Company, which controlled 300,000 acres of land and water irrigation rights. Who the fuck do you think you are owning all that water? However, in 1913, family went bankrupt. Property was sold to George Pope, but also had strong banking ties. Directorships in Mills Fargo Bank, Using Trust Company, Bank of California, the Burlingame Land and Water Company, the Henry Investment Company. His son, George Jr., another George, became director of the Crocker Anglo Bank, won the Kentucky Derby twice. All a bunch of richy riches. Neighboring. Imagine that. First permanent settler here in Lake Tahoe. This particular Phipps, although it's right near the Indian bedrock mortar site, an offshore Indian mortar site, it's probably unrelated to the property here. Partial basement, 3-story Victorian stone building, turreted bays, all very simplistic, spacious, and solid. The high ceilings and massive mantles. The history of this area is essentially the history of Lake Tahoe. There were many names for Lake Tahoe. Mountain Lake, Lake Bonpland, Fremont's Lake, Truckee Lake, Big Truckee Lake, Bigelow's Lake, Lake Malon, Lake Bigler, Lake. Finally, Tahoe was officially selected by a slow legislature 100 years later. According to geologist John de LeConte, the lake is 22 miles long, grade its width is 12 miles, maximum depth of water is 1,600 feet, and it was, according to eyewitnesses, formed when a large part of the crust block lying west of the main Sierra and Break gradually sank, much other subsequent glacial action. Other eyewitnesses claim that during post-glacial times a forest mantle covered the area, creating a region inviting to its pre-Caucasian inhabitants, the Washoe Indian. Evidence of this habitation is found in sugar pine in the form of some bedrock mortar sites. Stone with holes in the ground. Contact with the whites affected little change in their life at first, but by the mid-1850s, the white intruders had changed the environment sufficiently to require the Indians to depend on the whites for survival. Oh, yes, please. We've lived here for hundreds of years, but now you have moved here. Now we need you, white man. California narratives are so garbage. Anyhow, during this time, the countryside was swamped by an influx of immigrants and settlers, the first of which was William Phipps, who claimed 160 acres under the Homestead Act, built several cabins, and set out to be a commercial fisherman with pioneer neighbors. 40 years later, the California Fish Commission forced him to cease his illegal impounding of fish, and he died in Georgetown. But he was acquired by another lake pioneer who ran it as a hotel, before it was sold to Wells Fargo, of course. Named Bellevue, and then burnt to the ground in 1893, until Isaiah Hellman, the San Francisco banker, purchased it and built a brand new mansion. The finest private estate in the High Sierra, we're told. The state, of course, took over the property in 1965, because they'd always owned it, no doubt. The neighboring house is called the Heller Estate, colloquially known as Valhalla. The designer is reputed to have been some architect named Rankin. It's amazing how none of these homes down here have an architect can actually point out, yet the craftsmanship is superb. They all have a massive fireplace. It was apparently constructed by some Scandinavian engineer mason who devised a complex system of pulleys and tackle to lift the large stones into place. Oh, really? Huge beamed hall, stone fireplacing evoking strong medieval Nordic images, similar to the past Scandinavian influence held by the neighboring houses. Maybe they inspired each other. While the house is handsome and inviting on the exterior, Valhalla's outstanding architectural values lies in the sheer power of its interior. Walter Heller, who built the house in 1924, was a wealthy financier and banker of San Francisco, shockingly. A PhD from the University of Göttingen. Yeah. Next we have a place that sounded very familiar to me as I came across it, and I had to actually go back through the comments here to find out why I was familiar. And would you believe it? It was the series dedicatee. It was the guest of honor himself, D-Star, the inspiration behind this particular leg of our journey. He had spent some time there and told me that the history didn't check out at all, and I'd added to my list, which is endless, and admittedly having not got a chance to check it out yet. But lo and behold, here we find it here as one of the exhibits in El Dorado County. And he's absolutely right, Mr. D-Star is. This is very sketchy. And the official story is that Miss Laura Josephine Knight buys the property at the foot of Lake Tahoe's Emerald Bay in 1928 as a site for the summer home. She wants a home to complement the fjord-like setting. So she reaches out to her, I believe, nephew through marriage, a Swedish-born Lennart Palme, who the two of them managed to complete this in 2 years and travel through Europe for inspiration. Miss Knight insists on preserving the surrounding beauty of Emerald Bay, and so the story goes that she was reminded of Scandinavian fjords when she saw Emerald Bay. Her nephew by marriage, who had come over in 1923, 5 years earlier, with a degree in mechanics from the Royal Technical University in Stockholm. He builds a place called Vikingsborg for himself in Rye, New York. And after Miss Laura Knight visits this house, she decides she has to design a building with similar inspiration. Vikingsborg no longer exists, and this Vikings home is the only known example of this dude's work in Sweden or the United States. So he becomes a member of the American Institute of Architects, like all good deep state fakies. And he was registered in California and New York, two hubs of deep state fakery. So to gather furnishings, the two of them travel to Scandinavia in 1928. Because of this trip, we're told that it represents no single architectural style, because Scandinavian building traditions is not really homogeneous. The only thing that really unites Swedish-American builders, we're told, is their use of immigrants from Sweden, whether they're formally trained or they're farmers building their own homes. Now, there are elements of their log cabins that can be traceable, like notched corner joints, construction without nails, typical Swedish peasant home stuff. And Viking home is based on buildings constructed in a similar manner. So we're told, although much of its inspiration came from peasant homes, it's actually considered a Viking castle. The walls of the east wing are finished in the same manner as the stone castle of the King St. Olaf built. There are wide wooden planks that are from massive trees that are hand-drawn, hand-hewn, cross dragon beams, inspired by Scandinavian churches where they offer protection from evil, hand-carved branches that hold gutters in place and offer similar protection from, harmful spirits. Here's a great line here. Miss Knight was devoted to preserving the setting as much as possible. She went so far as to order Palme to construct the house around the site's trees. As the architect describes this mandate, the problem of placing Vikings home without disturbing the trees was perhaps the trickiest I've ever had to solve in my architectural career, either abroad or in these United States, because each tree had to be plotted on the drawing board. Space had to be found large enough for the main house, and then the wings had to be fitted and swung in such a way as to look quite natural and still not to touch the sacred trees. For example, the effect of this care is striking, since the trees nearest the house are as old and tall as trees throughout the property. Vikingsholm does not stick out as a barren area recently cleared for construction. Instead, the house gives the illusion that it was there before the trees. Imagine that. What an illusion. Does that seem probable? Or does it seem more probable that the house was there before the trees? We're told that it was essentially completed in one summer, since the first summer involved only excavating and quarrying the granite. Construction was essentially completed in the summer of 1929, with just a little finishing work done in the summer of 1930. The artistic qualities of the home required more than the ideas and sketches of Leonard Palme. Two Finnish immigrants lived in New York State were brought to Vikingsholm to finish it, which was essential to the Scandinavian feel. Today, replicating the same level of skill would be almost impossible. One man of Scandinavian descent, identified only as Roy from Sacramento, completed all the exterior wood carving and many of the interior furnishings. His carvings are rhythmic and organic, displaying great skill in recreating early Scandinavian styles, we're told, and because all the carving was done by this one man alone, the carvings carry a sense of continuity throughout the home. A remarkable achievement based on the limited time in which he completed the drawings. What a crock of shit. We're also told there were other properties here that have long since been destroyed. And I'm not sure why any of that's relevant at all, other than what another example of just a ridiculous narrative.